So this video is going to be a little bit scattered because I feel like I just have a bunch of different things to talk about. Some in terms of the game project and some in terms of what's going on in the world as it relates to any creative project, I think. So to start off with, you're going to see that I'm doing different studies in the background. These are not the enemy concepts. These are just things that I'm doing to try to learn how to really use this like texture kind of look, because I know that for these enemies I really want this texture kind of look, and I'm actually going to be using this exact brush to paint the texture onto the actual enemy 3D models. It's going to be the actual texture on them. Of course, whenever you do any of these studies, or you're going off to do some kind of like experiment, trying different things in code, art, whatever, that could be a time sink. So I basically said I'm not going to do more than 5 different little studies. I'm just going to figure out how this thing works and then stick with it. But I saw another artist. I mean, I've seen artists use like texture-y kind of looks in their work for years, but it's not really something I would say I really knew how to do myself or did that much. So figuring this out is really a necessity, because I know that look is really going to work for the enemies. So I gotta figure it out, and hopefully by the time this video is done, then you'll see that I have figured it out, or I found something that I'm happy with. But the interesting thing about these texture-y kind of brushes is you get this effect of blending through the texture, which is different from, if you use like a soft brush, you're blending by having these smooth gradients. But what I actually want is for like the skin of the enemies to have this look where, there are these different colors coming through. You see the texture and you see all the mix of the colors. So hopefully I can capture that. That's really what I'm going for. So we'll see. But the reason for doing studies is I don't want to try to be doing the enemy concepts at the same time as I'm trying to figure out how this kind of brush works. Trying to do 2 things at the same time it's never a good idea if you can avoid it. I think it's better to just learn the one thing and then jump over to doing the other thing before you try and do everything all at once. As for the actual enemy designs that I want to go for, I want to talk about the things I don't want to do, the things that are, I think, mistakes to do for this particular project, and what I'm really going after, because what I want the player to do, or the reaction I want the player to have, is to see these enemies and see them as clearly being enemies, disgusting, horrible creatures that they want to shoot like right away. So it's really like a horror kind of concept, horror kind of design. These are monsters. These are, horrible things, horrible creatures you want to kill because they're just so obviously horrible. So if I can get like some kind of visceral kind of reaction, that's really what I want. I want people to have a real reaction to these enemies that you probably wouldn't have with just like a zombie. And some of the things that I see when I look at like monsters or things in movies, it's like some of it is really, I think, tame, maybe is what you could say. It's like a guy in a suit, or look at something like Predator is not really that weird. Like it's clearly a dude in a suit, but he's got a weird face. I want to do something much more maybe gross or disturbing. I mean, to get that reaction. So when I think of good horror kind of designs, things that are really frightening, you look at like the Alien movie. The Alien is actually maybe one of the very, very few times in movies where this creature is revealed on the screen, and it's just as terrifying as something off screen, where it's got like this really weird head. It doesn't have eyes. It's got like bones on the outside of its body, or an exoskeleton, I guess you would say. I think the limbs are not at all like a guy wearing a suit. So those are some of the things that, maybe I would take some inspiration from, but I don't want to do anything too close to the Alien because, well, one, I just don't want to copy something, but the enemies that I want to make are clearly inspired by human beings, or maybe at one point they were human beings, but they were transformed by whatever this artificial intelligence is that's on this planet or moon. And maybe what it's been doing is trying to create its own version of like the perfect human being or something. I don't know. I mean, I haven't thought too much about that part, like the motivation. All that's really important for the game and for the player is that there is this thing there that's trying to create something to stop the player, to kill the player, and so on. I think the main sources of inspiration for me are more like the movie The Thing, and just looking at what the AI artwork was looking like, or not even artwork, just AI generated images, where the AI will just give people as many, fingers or hands or limbs or whatever. I think that's part of the major inspiration to me, because if the AI actually was in a position to create life forms or try to perfect human beings, what would it do? It would iterate, and it would try to, give people a million teeth or something. It could do anything. And, there's an obvious horror element to that for us as human beings ourselves, because we don't want to be perfected by some outside force. Like when it comes to the thing is interesting because the creature is not any specific thing in that movie. It's just the organic matter, the body parts, all sort of turning into separate living entities. I mean, I don't want to go into too much graphic detail of what happens in that movie, but, there are scenes where a person who has been infected by this thing, and, their body basically splits off into parts, and that's sort of the horror monster, is just organic matter splitting off into its fundamental pieces and attacking other people, I guess you could say. So that is too complicated to do, but it is a good starting point, and something I didn't really think about or notice before, but I was just looking at random enemies, and in Half-Life there is the zombie, which is a combination in terms of inspiration. It is taking inspiration from The Thing, and it's taking inspiration from Alien, which, in hindsight, that's kind of obvious. The little head crab monster latches onto people's heads, just like the facehugger does in Alien, and the zombie has this like chest cavity thing where it like eats by shoving things into its chest, which is like the scene in The Thing, obviously, where the doctor puts his hand inside. You know what happens in that scene. If you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But anyway, so that's pretty much the general idea. The other thing that I have to get is, in these designs, I have to be clear that these enemies can fly. I have to somehow visually represent that. I don't know how clearly I really want to be with that. Maybe it's not an issue at all. I don't know. I'm gonna just see what happens with that part. But the other thing is the enemies have to have long reach. I decided that because the common enemies are melee enemies and the player has a lot of ranged weapons, it's an issue if the player can very easily just dodge enemies. So part of the solution to that is giving them long reach, and I think this is something that will actually contribute to the horror element of the enemy designs. So that's part of the reason why I think it's going to work well. But again, just gotta kind of see how that works. And if that aspect doesn't work, if giving the enemies, maybe arms which are 1.5 to 2 times as long as like a normal human's arms. If that's too powerful for them for some reason, then I'll just turn that into like a rare enemy type. So I'm confident that this will not be like a waste of work, so I'm okay with taking a little bit of a risk with it, but it's not really a risk because I can still use it no matter what. So yeah, that's pretty much where the enemy design is going. The other thing I want to talk about is just what's actually going on, in the world. Like, I mean, part of the reason I have this theme in the game of AI is because I think the concern, or maybe even if you just want to go full on and just say the fear of AI, I think that's very real for a lot of people. I wouldn't say that I'm fully in the camp of, like shut the computer down, stop them from doing research. I don't actually have a prediction of what's going to happen, but clearly there are already negative effects in the world. People are already losing their jobs, and that's a concerning thing, because in most places in the world there is not a society or an ideology which looks at anybody who's lost their job, or maybe your whole career was like being a concept artist or something, and now you just have a computer that spits out concept art. You have one guy who's like an art director, and you type in spit out my horror enemy, give me 100 creature designs, and I'll just pick one, and then I'll go over to another AI which generates the 3D model. Generate a 3D model from this image or from this prompt. This is really a bad situation. This is not something our society is built to handle. It's not something the human being is meant to handle. I mean, even if you take the best case scenario where human beings are freed, quote unquote freed from all work, is that something a human being is meant to be able to handle? I mean, I know for me that, no matter what happens, I want to work on creative things. I would still want to work on creative projects. And that's kind of part of the motivation for me, is we're living in possibly the last era of things created by people. This might be the last span of history where a person sits down and a person does, the art for something. They write the story for something, they make the 3D models, they do the programming for, if it's a game project. But, in 5 years or 10 years or 50 years, I don't know how long this era would last, but it clearly isn't going to last forever. I mean, I reached a point with this project where I was noticing that there was an issue with the code in terms of, I had different scripts which are interrelated, and they're making calls to each other, and it's getting too complex. And I asked one of the AI chat programs, how it would solve that problem. And I had a solution in mind, used the, what they call the mediator design pattern. That was my idea. And the chat program spit out the same exact idea. So it's at least as good at that particular question as I am. And it's easy to extrapolate that you could train these things better, you could give them better hardware, and what that means is eventually it's feasible to get to the point where you just go to this chat program and it creates sub AI agents. This is already something I've seen people post videos to YouTube describing them doing. People are already doing this, where you have a main AI and it creates sub AIs and they go off and do other tasks. But eventually, it stands to reason this is what's going to be what's creating things. And just as somebody who feels like they're living in the last era of where people make things, I just feel the desire to create something where the amount of AI involved had to have been very minor. I feel like this is in a way an opportunity. I mean, obviously, there are people out there who feel like, well, you're drawing on a computer, so that's not real. And in some case, okay, there is something maybe lost in terms of, you could be doing oil paints versus using a digital program, and you would get something more real in terms of art. I can see that argument, but in terms of, I still have to make the mark. I still have to make the decision. Whereas with the AI artwork, you just go to this program and you type in, cinematic lighting. You just type cinematic lighting portrait, and it spits out a person. And I didn't really make any decisions besides the words typed into this prompt, and it created something that many people say, oh, that looks good, that's beautiful. We can get rid of whatever, our art department at our game studio, and we can just have one art director, and he just tells AI what to do. And that's nuts. That's a huge difference from jumping from, oil painting to digital painting. There's no comparison there, because you don't even need the artist. You just need a text description of what you wanted. So it's an insane time to be living in, and I hope that if you are at all a creative person, you just look at that and you go, yeah, this is the time to jump into something, to create something before people were not part of the creation process anymore, really. You just have a prompt. We just had this strike, writer's strike and actor strike, where the creative people, the creative workers, the actors and writers, are trying to defend themselves in part from AI, for being replaced by AI. But here's the thing: even if they could get every legal protection, everything they want in a contract, you could never use my likeness as a replacement actor in a film. That might work for Hollywood, but then someone else who comes along and says, well, I'm not part of Hollywood, I don't have to abide by any of these rules, and I have enough hardware, enough graphics cards, whatever, to just generate a movie on my own. It doesn't matter what these writers and actors are doing, because there's going to come a day where your computer sitting in your house can generate a movie. There's going to come a day where you just sit down, you can generate a script, and then you generate the movie from the script, maybe. Or, it's like the sub-agent thing. You have one sub-AI which writes the script, and another sub-AI which starts generating the scenes of the movie. And what that means is there is no protection. There's really no protection in the long term. And this is a similar thing with the AI art, because the artists were, rightfully so, angry that the entire internet was basically scraped, and a data set was created from artists' works, from, every painting that's on the internet, basically, or photo, stock image, whatever. So there are a number of lawsuits from artists going after, like, Stable Diffusion. Even if you only train the AI on, like, public domain images, eventually the people are going to sell their work into these training sets, these data sets, or people are going to train it on their own work. This is just inevitable, that certain forms of technology lead to a certain outcome. This is the thing, like with watching a documentary versus reading a book. Like, if you watch a documentary, you can see a lot of images, but the amount of understanding you're going to have, I think, it's pretty much always going to be less than if you read a book. That's the inherent nature of certain mediums, certain technologies, that some are designed for a certain purpose, and it's not up to us to just choose to interpret a technology in a certain way. And this is the thing with AI. There are people saying, oh, it's a tool. But it's not a tool if it develops to the point where it starts replacing people. And it's already doing this. So, it's an interesting time, and it's going to be interesting to see how people deal with it, because I don't know if there is a way for people to deal with it. I don't know if human beings are meant, in the good scenario, to have everything solved. And in the bad scenario, a very small number of people who own the hardware that runs the AI are going to profit off of it. They're going to control everything. Yeah, so I don't know if even the good outcome is that good, and the bad outcome is really bad. That's a major part of the reason why it was kind of obvious to me that, we're again at this point where AI is being this evil entity, as a theme for anything, but for this game in particular, it makes sense. I feel like it's going to be relevant basically from here on. As long as human beings exist, we're going to have this AI stuff, and it's going to be a major problem. Maybe people will fight over this AI stuff legally, like it's a resource, like people in the past have fought over, food, water, resources. So, hopefully it's not that. Maybe it's just, maybe this Chat GPT, they can't figure out how to improve it anymore, and it doesn't really improve. That would be nice, actually, because then it would be stuck at the point where it's just a tool. It's just like kids use it to cheat on their homework, or you run into a coding problem and you ask it some simple question. But, the reality is I just don't see it going that way. I see it becoming a bigger and bigger issue. So anyway, that's my thought on that. So make something human while you still can, and try to maybe enjoy the world before it just turns into Pepsi the movie. You're just watching movies which are created by giant corporations, which are advertisements for their products. Anyway, I think that's enough rambling probably for this video. So peace.